The track is Cursed by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Royalty free, you can find it on YouTube. Hey everybody, it's B-Show Brian coming at you for another edition of Wrestling Reanimated. It's been a long time, and I want to thank everyone for supporting the show. There's still people downloading old episodes, so I appreciate this. I know we've made some changes, but first I want to plug the recent project that I've been working on, Break the Apocalypse, with John Draper, formerly of Wrestling Soup, and Shaheen of Nuclear Heat Graphics and Nuclear Heat Design. So if you get a chance, go check Break the Apocalypse out. We have a Patreon for bonus content and for full episodes. So we usually do them once a week. We were going to do one tonight, but some things happened and we're doing it tomorrow. So I had an opportunity to record this. The first Wrestling Reanimated in a long time. Quite a bit. So, again, some other things have taken my focus away from this, and unfortunately, wrestling wasn't all that fun to to talk about for a while. So, at any rate, I'm back for now, and going to record some Survivor Series centric stuff. Now, this topic has been done to death. The Montreal Screwjob, Bret versus Shawn, and all this stuff. And I wanted to take a different approach, which is what I do on Wrestling Reanimated. This is where we remake, we re-envision different scenarios, not fantasy booking style, but we look at things in a different way and try to recreate things and see how things could have turned out, or re-examine alternate scenarios. We'll say that. So you can contact me at bshowbrian@gmail.com. I'm bshowbrian on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can find all the shows, whether it's horror reanimated or wrestling reanimated, at bshowpodcast.com. So this week is part one of a two-part. I don't know if I'm going to do this second part tonight or next week. Again, the Montreal Screwjob has been done to death. So, and I don't even need these anymore after sound check. The Montreal Screwjob has been done to death. So I don't want to just talk about the Montreal Screwjob. And for those of you who don't know, who may have been living under a rock the past couple decades, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels for the WWF title, Survivor Series 97. They go to the match. They go to do the planned finish after months and months of feuding backstage with each other, not wanting to do business with each other. And Vince McMahon changed the finish on Bret, and they got the title off of him one way or another. That's what happened. It led to Bret going to WCW. Shawn Michaels stayed in the WWF. Vince essentially chose Shawn Michaels over Bret, and the rest is history. So what I wanted to talk about tonight is part one. What if Bret stayed? Like, what if Vince chose Bret? And I know I may have talked about this briefly with Mr. Positive on another show we did a long time ago, but I didn't really dig in. We talked about some of the implications of both sides. But I want to take time to talk about one side, and then next week talk about another. So, as I mentioned, Vince chose Shawn. And the background of this, for those, again, who don't know, who've been living under a rock, Bret was on his way out already. He was going to WCW. He snagged a fat contract. Vince McMahon helped him do that in a way by letting him out of his contract early, and it was this weird lifetime contract with these different payment. Anyway, long story short, Vince kind of let him out of his contract because he wasn't happy, and Vince couldn't pay him the money that he promised him he'd pay him. Vince didn't see Bret as the long-term attraction. Bret was on his way out, so Vince let him go and chose Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels would end up leaving the WWF by April of the following year because of a combination of drug issues, personal issues, and major back injury that he suffered at Royal Rumble of that year. So let's take a step back. And first, next week we'll talk about Shawn Michaels and WCW, which to me is very fascinating. But one thing that always bugged me about this, and I think it's why everyone was surprised that Vince would do this to Bret, is that Bret seemed like the easy choice for Vince to select. In many ways, Bret was the reliable one. Bret was Old Faithful. I mean, if you look at Bret's run from 1993 to 1997, 92 to 97. Bret got the WWF title with no build-up. He won it from Ric Flair as a quick transition when Flair was injured on a house show that was later released on Coliseum Video, the match was, and we've seen it now. But no build-up, no angle. Then it went back to Yokozuna and on to Hulk Hogan. Hulk loses it back to Yoko. Never feuds with Bret. Bret and Lex feud with Yoko. Bret has an issue going with Owen and then wins the title from Yoko. He doesn't really beat Yoko. Yoko falls and knocks himself out. It was just really haphazard. You could tell that it wasn't the original plan for Bret to become the champion. At least in 92, they were looking for other things. Warrior was in the mix. Flair was in the mix. Hogan was in the mix. So, Bret was always just kind of there. So, Bret begins to redefine what the WWF champion is in a post-Hogan, post-Warrior, post-steroid, post-big attraction era. And Bret's having good wrestling matches. And the crowds are smaller. I mean, twofold. One, Bret was never a huge draw all at one time. Now, he had some long-term success as the champion, but to be fair, he was one of the lower-drawing WWF champions in history, especially at that point. So there was the knock on Bret that he wasn't a great draw, and it always seemed when I was a kid like Bret was the champ, and I accepted him as the champ, but it always seemed like they were waiting for that next big star. And Bret was just holding the title. I mean, that's how it always seemed to me, even though I loved Bret Hart when I was a kid. And when Diesel got the title, it was cool because Diesel was this big jack dude. But Bret was still, to me, the guy. And then even when Shawn Michaels won it, it was cool, and I liked Shawn Michaels. But to me, Bret, again, was still the guy. So it's kind of interesting the way things worked out, where Vince would cite Bret as not being much of a draw. And it's like, well, another thing that bugged me is Vince has always said that, and that's fair. But neither was Shawn Michaels, and neither was Diesel. I mean, you can look up, I mean, they've got some lists online that are supposed to be pretty accurate, but if you look at what the numbers supposedly were, Bret and Shawn weren't that different. And Diesel wasn't all that much better either. So, I don't know, some people knock him for being the lowest drawing WWF champion of all time. That's not exactly true. He's in the bottom 50%. But no one was drawing at that time. So it's interesting when you hear, because I wasn't even going to do this episode, but I heard Bruce Pritchard talking about it on his show recently. I don't listen to him much anymore, but I did hear some comments that he had made about why they let Bret go. And Bret was seen as not being much of a draw anymore. But my point was nobody was. So that being a reason always seemed kind of suspect to me. Or not suspect, but like it wasn't really a great reason because nobody was. So if you're saying, well, Bret's not worth the money we're paying him, well, technically neither is Shawn Michaels, but for some reason Vince had a fascination with him. And neither was Diesel, but Vince had a fascination with him. But it really did feel like Vince had some sort of fascination with Shawn Michaels. So, all right, that's enough on the backstory. But again, Bret was just kind of there. They were priming Diesel. They were priming Hogan. They were priming Yoko. They were priming everybody else. Then they were priming Shawn Michaels. Then they were priming Diesel. And it was to me always this and Lex. Let's not forget Lex. Bret was all but forgotten, and he was given this other side program when Lex was being built as the next Hulk Hogan. So his entire run, he was given the ball a bit, but put in the back seat. It was weird. Almost like what they did with CM Punk. CM Punk, they made him the champion, and it was and Chris Benoit, they made them the champion. Hey, look, we're making you the champion. But then all the major angles when Chris Benoit was there was, Triple H and Evolution. When CM Punk was champion, they gave all of his fresh challengers and the natural opponents like John Laurinaitis to John Cena. So that same thing happened with Bret, or similar, I should say. So what could have been? I try to keep these shows about 30 minutes. So far, we're at about 9, so that gives us a good 20 minutes to banter this around a bit. And if you want to weigh in on your thoughts, bshowpodcast.com, or go to Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, bshowbrian. So, Bret staying would have made sense in a lot of ways, and I think it could have worked, but it also would have maybe prevented some things from happening. Because if we look at the impact, Bret and the Hart Foundation could have been a precursor to the corporation if it was played a certain way. And I'm not saying they should have. I'm just saying it could have been. Like if you look on the screen, the Vince McMahon Bret Hart picture, I selected that specifically because the first thought was, if Vince is going to choose someone, and that's another thing that never made sense to me, is choosing Shawn Michaels, storyline fashion. Those guys are counterculture, anti-authority, right? Their whole angle leading up to that, and even into early '98, they were doing stuff where they were wearing the face shields in front of Slaughter because of the lisp, and with the windshield wipers on them and stuff. It was funny. But those two guys, Triple H and HBK at the time, and China, so those three, to me it flew in the face of tradition. So for Vince McMahon to back the young, irreverent, anti-establishment, anti-authority people, as opposed to Bret, who was Mr. Reliable, that never made sense to me either. Because if you're looking at it even from a storyline standpoint, like why would the company back these guys who've been thumbing their nose at them? And then there was never any angle there with DX and the corporation. Yeah, there was some stuff with Slaughter, Owen, China, and stuff, but I think that had been happening before, leading up to that. So I always thought that was weird. And you could have used the Hart Foundation, like I said, as a precursor to the corporation. And if you think about it, the Hart Foundation, not that they should have come out with plastic Tommy guns and pinstripe suits and shit, but Hart Foundation could have been a callback or a reference to like the mafioso days of wrestling. So if you think about wrestling, it was like the mafia. Run by families in a lot of cases, divided up into territories. They didn't compete with one another. They exchanged talent. I mean, they controlled their own industry. So, if Bret stayed, there could be an obvious connection there, and you'd have maybe Bret on Raw come out with Vince, or them at the same time, as Vince is kind of explaining, I did what I had to do, and make it look like Bret and the family kind of put a gun to his head. Because, Mafia used to extort businesses, but they also used businesses as legitimate fronts and things like that. There was a relationship with some businesses in the Mafia. So go that route. Again, I'm not saying, pull out plastic Tommy guns and wear fedoras and talk with an Italian accent, a hitman. But, they called him the Hitman. I mean, shit, even if you thought Anvil and Davey were past, their prime, then fuck it. Take them out of the ring full time and just make them Bret's bodyguards. All roads lead to Bret, right? Make Bret seem like a bigger star. Give him an entourage. Fuck it. Give him Sonny. But the point is, that's an interesting way they could have played it. Bret and the Mafia essentially extorting Vince McMahon into making a decision, right? And you could still have had the feud with Austin, although I would argue that was probably to be short-lived because they'd already been feuding for so long. So that's debatable there. And if not, who would he feud with? That's another thing I ran into. Was like, okay, because the idea was with Shawn, he feuded with Austin. Austin had the run up to the title. They had Mike Tyson come in, and HBK was gone, and Austin went on to feud with Foley. And that was another issue with this is, if Bret stays in Bret feuds with Austin or with the corporation, does Foley get his run on top? Because Foley really stepped up and filled in for Bret when he left. So how does that go? And I think if you kind of combine those, you come up with something kind of interesting. Because one of the things I was thinking is, maybe you do Bret and Austin as like the capstone to their major part of their rivalry, or at least it's sold as that way. But it's under different circumstances, because although Austin has run up against the corporate or the Hart Foundation before, now they're insinuating that they're in step with the company. So now it's Austin versus the entire company, and you would think that Bret and the Hart Foundation have kind of carte blanche to do whatever they want. But Bret loses some way or another, right? Of course, Austin's going to get crowned at Mania, because that was the other thing. If Bret stays, do you make him champion again? Well, you're not going to snuff out Austin. Austin didn't beat him at WrestleMania 13. They've been building their rivalry for like 2 years. It was pretty long in the tooth. It was time for a definitive end to that chapter. And I think that makes sense, because if you do that and you split off from there, you could still do Austin Foley with different circumstances, and then Bret could feud with somebody else. And a guy that I think he'd had a few matches with, but never really a full-blown feud, is Ken Shamrock. So now bring Shamrock up. Shamrock came in as a special enforcer into the submission match with Bret and Austin the year before, so now maybe that's the connection. And still do Austin versus Bret with Tyson in the middle, and maybe that's the thing. Maybe Vince is on commentary a little bit more forward when Austin wins the Rumble, and then bring in Tyson, and Austin ruins everything, and maybe Vince is like, maybe he paid top dollar for Tyson to come in and make sure the right man wins and the right guy loses, because he doesn't want Austin as champion. Because at least if Bret's going to extort him, he knows what he's got, right? At least for now. And then you could have Foley come on board, and maybe after Bret loses, that's when Foley comes in, and maybe that's Vince's backup plan, because he's not happy with Bret for losing. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? That's a pretty obvious conclusion, that if Bret loses after Vince is, backed that pony. So not only did I back you, but I kept all your family, and I let you push me around and box me into a corner, and you still didn't win. So then maybe Vince, do the same thing with Foley, where Foley wants Vince's attention and affection, and Vince manipulates him like a puppet. And maybe, they were humanizing Foley a little bit at that time. Maybe Foley says something like, hey, Steve, we've ridden up and down the road for years and years, but Vince McMahon pays my paychecks that pay for my kids' dental work and braces and shit, whatever. Yeah, that was bad, Foley, especially toward the end. But you get the point. Like, Vince is Mr. Corporate. Vince is a dick. He's using his money, his influence to manipulate Foley and turn him against Austin, when he probably would have been an ally. And I think he did some 6-man tags and stuff, 8-man tags leading up to WrestleMania that year with him and Funk. So you wouldn't really change a lot. You just kind of plug Bret in where Shawn was, and then you continue the angle with more friction between Vince and Bret. And again, I'm not fantasy booking this. I'm just kind of going through the scenario where you could still accomplish bringing up Foley and making him, making him a main eventer and letting him fill in that role. You bring up Shamrock to feud with Bret. That's going to elevate Shamrock, and those matches would have been awesome. Because imagine submission matches and cage matches and all sorts of stuff with Bret and Shamrock. I mean, they did the Lion's Den match. They did the match at the Dungeon with Owen Hart a year or two later. So, I mean, that's interesting. You could always pair up Bret and Owen if his heel run doesn't work great. And in fact, one of the things I was thinking of in the back of my head was maybe after WrestleMania, Vince is pissed, and kind of as punishment, give the people what they want, great matchups on Monday Night Raw. Veiled as that, but really punishment. Maybe he books the Hart Foundation in 6-man matches with Bret, Davey, and Owen, or Bret, Owen, and Anvil, or whatever, in 6 or 8-man matches with Shamrock, the Road Warriors, and Vader, or Shamrock, the Road Warriors, and somebody else. So there's one opponent. We got Shamrock. right? And LOD 2000, forget that. Just plain old LOD. Leave them alone. They are what they are. Leave them as is. But then you could have those matches where you've got maybe Bulldog and Davey teaming up if you don't make them Bret's, defensemen in a way. Have them team up and have them feud with the Road Warriors, two big, strong teams with history who've worked together in different forms and fashions. But again, keeping things fresh, bringing up a fresh opponent for Bret, elevating Shamrock, but Bret's going to go over ultimately, and he's got the corporation to back him. Another one I thought of too was Mick Foley, because Bret and Foley never had a real good feud, and I think Foley was sympathetic enough even at this time where you could bring him in as Vince's second choice, right, his backup. And Vince is manipulating Foley and kind of putting the screws to Bret, and now Bret resents Foley because he wants to be champion, and now Vince is kind of putting his chips behind Foley and kind of showing, and Bret and Vince are flexing on one another. Foley's caught in the middle. He's just trying to stay employed and make a paycheck and maybe win the WWF title along the way. And then, force an uneasy alliance with Bret and Foley. So maybe you do, because they did like a triple threat match with Undertaker and Kane versus Austin to get the title off of him. So maybe you do that with Foley and Bret. And the idea on its face is you have the two corporate guys going against Austin. So Austin's in a no-win situation, but the out is that Foley and Bret both hate each other and they both want to be champion. Bret needs to be champion. He's doing it, to justify what happened in Montreal to get his title back from Austin to prove he's still the man. He is the franchise player. He's the captain of the team and the corporate pick champion. But you've also got Foley now backed by Vince. So now, there's friction there. And it can lead to, even if they're both heels, Foley's more sympathetic in this role, and even as a wrestler and a person in some cases. If Bret's full-blown heel and is sold out, then Foley's just doing his job and trying to put money away for his kids and win the title. Foley's motivation is a little bit more noble than Bret's at this point. So I think you could get interesting matches there. And then, of course, when Foley finally does turn full-on babyface, or if Foley stays a heel and Bret turns babyface again, I mean, you could really, really have some great matches and great angles there. Kane is another guy I thought of would be a really interesting opponent for Bret, because Kane came in and was just killing dudes. He killed Vader, killed Foley, killed everybody. In fact, he got a real short run with the title in 1998. Then him and Undertaker kind of teamed up, and then they split him apart. But to me, Bret was a dude who could go up against this monster Kane, and Bret had proven in matches with Diesel and other monsters that Bret could wear you down because he was just that good and that tough and that durable. So you could do a lot of different things in different scenarios. The one I really, really was thinking of, but I don't think would have panned out, was Bret and The Rock. And I know Bret fought Rocky Maivia in, I think, 1997 in a match on, I think, Monday Night Raw. So they did cross paths. But they never fought each other in their final form, right? It's a weird way to say it, but like The Rock. Rocky Maivia fought Bret Hart. The Rock never did. And heel corporation Rock versus heel corporation Bret versus The Rock. Charismatic, confident, cool The Rock. That matchup would have been amazing. The Rock versus Bret Hart. Their styles probably would have gone together because Bret was the consummate technician. Rock was the flash and the charisma. And Bret had paired well with guys like that in the past. So that's a shoo-in and a no-brainer. Would have been just amazing to see. And I was trying to think of how that would work. And I started thinking about Survivor Series because in 1998, the way the title happened was Austin beat Michaels at WrestleMania. Austin feuded with Foley in the spring and into the summer. SummerSlam, Austin feuded with The Undertaker, who They did this weird, like, Undertaker setting Austin up. Maybe he's not setting him up angle. Is he teaming with Kane? Is he not? And then Taker and Kane teamed up, and then we started feuding with Austin and joined forces with Vince McMahon, and they had the corporate ministry, and it was fucking terrible. But then, what was it? 98 Survivor Series 98 was the Deadly Game WWF title tournament. The title was vacant. They wanted to try to keep the title off of Austin. Vince did. Tournaments aren't great, and the matches were like 2 minutes long a piece, but it was just entertaining as a pay-per-view to go back and watch. I remember that night listening to it on pay-per-view through a scrambled channel and just being beside myself listening to what happened. But that was the night The Rock was chosen as a corporate champion. Mankind was the patsy. And then that's what that's what turned Foley babyface. He feuded with Rock into early 99, setting up a Rock Austin clash at WrestleMania. So thinking about that would have been perfect for this, because if you brought up Shamrock, if you had him feud with Bret, if you had Bret feud interacting with Foley and with Austin, if you have Undertaker and Kane, that's like six or eight guys now up at the top, Foley, that you put in that tournament, and any one of them is a shoo-in for the title. And I think with Bret in the mix, because Shawn wouldn't have been at that point because Shawn was gone. At that point, Bret being in the mix would have lent some more credibility to that tournament. And at first I thought having Bret and Foley didn't make sense because the corporation only needed one patsy if they were going to back The Rock. But I think it also makes sense, and I could see it playing out in this way if they had kept Bret around. Having Bret and Foley going back and forth is preventing Vince from bringing the title back into the corporation, or getting the title off of Austin. So then you go to Deadly Game, and maybe one of I'm not fantasy booking, but I thought about some of these scenarios and how they could play out if Bret was around. And if Vince was pissed that Foley and Bret never got the job done against Austin, then you have Undertaker and Kane that could have worked with Vince, and then you could have had a feud with Foley and Bret versus Undertaker and Kane, which would have been great matches. You could have had some kind of scenario where, maybe, this is another thing I kicked around, maybe Vince forces Bret into a situation for crossing him and flexing to kind of take away his firepower, and maybe he puts the Hart Foundation in a four-way. The winner keeps his job. And Bret has no choice in that matter but to essentially retire his brothers-in-law, the whole Hart Foundation. And in one swoop, Vince takes all Bret's bargaining chips away, but at the same time forces Bret to kind of to work with Vince and kind of do his bidding. And then maybe at the tournament, Owen comes back under a mask or something, and then that's when you build the corporation. You've got Boss Man who's there, Rock's there, maybe Owen is there. So Owen is the sellout. I don't know. A lot of interesting things you could do. But I don't think The Rock would have worked out unless you did it right away. Like if you had Vince screw Foley in the final, and maybe Vince screwed Bret earlier on with either the Hart Foundation turning on Bret or just in another way. I don't know. Then maybe if Bret turns babyface, he can feud right away with The Rock. But again, now he's squeezing Foley out of a position where Foley would have been much more sentimental in that role, and that's what worked to help get The Rock over as a heel. So I don't know if that would have been the right call to do Rock versus Bret. And then The Rock feuded with Austin over the title in March. So if you do Rock versus Bret at the end of the year, or even you do Foley versus Rock and set up Rock versus Bret at WrestleMania with Bret losing to The Rock, you could have him win, but Austin's the hot babyface. So now what do you do with Bret? So it was really weird with with the way things were set up and the young guys coming up, I think you could have done a lot with them. But at the same time, once you get to a certain point, it's kind of played out. So maybe Vince was right. Maybe he is the genius. But man, there was something else I was thinking of too. Another matchup that I can't think of now. But again, think of that. You know, Bret versus Kane, Bret versus Shamrock, Bret versus Austin, Bret versus Austin, Bret versus Foley. Those three matches alone would have been great. You know, Foley, Kane, Shamrock, and potentially The Rock. And, you know, if you had a four-way type feud after Survivor Series leading into WrestleMania, Bret, Austin, Rock, and Foley, you also have The Undertaker and Kane in there. Vince has the corporation. So you could have done any number of things. You have a lot of new people coming up as well. So that seemed to be the most realistic way that this could have played out if Bret stayed. And like I said, this is Wrestling Reanimated. We talk about the what ifs. So I don't know. What do you think about Bret? What if he stayed? What if Vince backed Bret? The other thing too that I thought of, I just don't know how it would have worked out timing wise, is they did that stupid union angle, and it fizzled out. Foley, when he left the corporation, he teamed with Test and Shamrock and Big Show, and it didn't really work. It was short-lived. I was thinking of, instead of that, what if, Bret flexes on Vince chooses somebody else, and then maybe that's the angle after Survivor Series while Foley's feuding with Rock, or maybe it's Bret versus the corporation, and Bret's trying to get his revenge and eventually get his match with Rock. So I don't know. But then if you think about that, I mean, you could have Bret, Davey, Owen, and Bulldog versus, once it gets set up, Bossman. Shit, who is in the corporation? Bossman, China, Triple H, event. Oh, they were not even until the next year. Trying to think. Shamrock was there. But shit, maybe Owen seizes his opportunity and says, "Fuck this. I'll join you, Vince. Pay me. I'll join the corporation." So then you have maybe Owen, Rock, and Owen and Rock had history from the Nation. So Owen and Rock, and you've got Bossman, Shamrock, and maybe you throw Test in there. So maybe that's the four. Maybe if you don't have Owen join, it's Owen, Bret, Davey, and Bulldog versus Test, Bossman, Shamrock, maybe Rock. I don't know. Lots of possibilities. And maybe Vince gets in the ring. He got in the ring with Austin. Who knows? I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know. I'm out of here. It's getting late. I got work to do tomorrow. Hopefully going to bring you part 2 next week, along with another horror reanimated and a Break the Apocalypse, which is completely different from this. So you can catch me anywhere, bshowpodcast.com. Break the Apocalypse is on Patreon, patreon.com/breaktheapp. And you can find us at Break the App on all social media if you want to check out. It's more comedy and pop culture based, talking about current events. And there's a backlog of exclusive episodes on Patreon for subscribers, $5 a month. But check it out, man. And hopefully I'll have more wrestling content for you next week. But I'm Brian J. I'm out of here. I'll see you next week, hopefully, for part 2, which is Shawn goes to WCW. But peace.